Welcome to today's Lift Up. We are going to talk about how do you eliminate destructive stress from your life. And whether you're watching live, and if you are, I'd love to hear from you in the chat box with your ideas, your comments, your questions, etc. Or if you're catching the replay, definitely let's open the conversation because I think that there are a lot of, at least it's my belief, that there are a lot of people who are really caught in the destructive stress cycle, and this is leading to the burnout that we're hearing about in the news. We are hearing about people resigning from jobs, but then the people who are left holding the bag are like just overwhelmed and can't deal with the heavy workload. And they're, many of them, some executives who are calling me are saying, you know what, I think the ones who are left are ready to go too. And so that's a problem. And my belief is that if we can address the root cause of the destructive stress, the 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 stuff, the human experience that actually drags down cultures and makes our life harder than it needs to be. If we can address that, we can step into our full productivity. We can be happier. We can be more in flow. We can have better, more harmonious relationships and more positive culture. Like it's all on the table and it's all there for your grabbing as long as you are committed to interrupting the destructive stress cycle. So that is what this is all about. Now I'm going over to the chat box. Oh goodness, we got Greg here, which is awesome. And where are you coming from? LinkedIn, on LinkedIn side, which is great. And of course, you can catch this on any social media platform where I stream. Obviously, not the ones that I'm not streaming on. The jokes begin. Actually, let's call that thought number one on how to stop the destructive stress cycle is to find joy and laughter and fun in the little moments of life. So instead of judging yourself when you mess up or say something that doesn't make sense, have a little giggle, lighten the mood a little bit and really lean into that and recognize perfection is unattainable, and trying to seek it can actually backfire and cause more destructive stress because we start getting into judgment and really just adding the layers on and making everything more difficult than it needs to be. Now, as I talk about destructive stress, I really think it's important to define what I mean by that. Because a lot of times as a society, we just talk about stress and we bucket it all together as if all stress is either good or bad or that there's a judgment around it. And I actually see this as two totally different issues. There is good stress. Now, good stress is designed to inspire us, to focus us, to help us grow, to keep us alive in a moment of danger. Those are really positive reasons to be able to harness or to have stress. And if we can leverage that and harness the power of that good stress, we can actually be more productive, be more in flow, feel more fulfilled, grow and develop even more so in our lives. So we really want to not be afraid of stress, the good stuff. Okay. On the other side, though, there is destructive stress. And destructive stress is very much anything that takes you away from all of those great attributes that I just described with good stress. It will tend to make you feel overwhelmed, anxious. It'll be harder to concentrate when you're feeling destructive stress. It's harder to be objective. So you may get caught up in a problem and it just starts to snowball and snowball and snowball. And it's really hard to step back and kind of go, hey, wait a second, what's the right answer here? How do I find a path forward? Okay, so really looking at the difference in your life between destructive stress and good stress. Let's embrace the good stuff. And we won't get into that today, but if you go into my book, Take Back Your Weekends, or my online course, Take Back Your Weekends, then you will actually learn how to actually harness that into your day to day. Let's talk about the destructive stress. Now, in order to stop the cycle of destructive stress, you're going to be going against the grain of society. Because our society is, I am noticing, designed to keep us stressed. all of the input, right? The stimuli that are coming into our lives, the constant negative news, the uncertainty of the world, the dark clouds hanging over us, so many people having health challenges, the threat to the economy. There are so many pieces, and then you add on how we interact on social media and compound that with still a lot of people feeling very isolated because of COVID restrictions or the fear of another wave, and society wants you stressed. And I don't mean that in a conspiracy way. I mean that in a reality. If you just float through life, if you just go on this journey and you are not making a concerted effort to actually change how you are interacting with destructive stress, then you are going to join the masses of getting caught up in the destructive stress cycle. And the frustration with that, of course, is going to lead to regret, unhappiness, etc. So that commitment, I believe, is the starting point. Does it matter? Like, what is your belief? Right? Because a lot of people are just like, well, hey, Allison, you know what? Stress is just a part of life. Well, yeah, the good stress. The destructive stress is often not a necessary part of life. Important to say, destructive stress is not a blanket term for any negative emotion. Okay, we need to have grief. We need to have the anger and all of those different pieces, right? There's despair. That's not destructive stress. That is a legitimate emotion. Okay, so that commitment is paramount to begin. Then we start looking at your day to day, and we only have so much to think, to feel, to be, to do each and every day. And so how we're allotting our various resources and using our capacity each day will determine how we're showing up and how much destructive stress we're feeling. So we can look at social media. And in fact, my lift up this morning that went out, so every Tuesday I send out an email that just sort of gives a story or a thought or something that goes and hopefully will inspire you to have a better, happier, less stressful day. And it was about social media and how, the other night I saw a post and I was like really irked by it. Like it was just like, I could have, I just ultimately ended up doing nothing. But my instinct, of course, was to write this thought, like, very intense thought. And then I reread it and I deleted it and I kept moving on. And then, of course, I did a social media post about doing that. So that's the irony of social media. What I think is so important about that is it just brought to my attention how quickly we can get sucked into destructive stress if we're not careful about how we're showing up in our day-to-day, and specifically in this situation, how we're engaging on social media. Because if we just get stuck in the mind-numbing scroll, that's going to wreak havoc on our mental well-being, our emotional well-being as well. It is, if we're clicking on things that are more negatively inclined, then that also is going to have an impact. And we could, have the algorithm start feeding us more and more negativity to add more and more and more and more and more negative stress into our lives. Okay, so that is something that's within our control. So how do you deal with this? Because again, society, I don't want to blame society as a whole, but it's designed, like these social media outlets are designed to suck you in. And the more you engage with the stuff that makes you emotionally charged, the more time you're going to spend on the platform. The more time you spend on the platform, the more money they make, the more advertising dollars, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's in the algorithm's best interest to serve you things that are going to emotionally charge you. And it's a lot easier to emotionally charge someone from a negative perspective than it is to inspire someone and emotionally charge them in a positive way. So, time limits, noticing the scroll, maybe blocking some websites during the day. I know I put time limits on my phone, and that has been really really important in my own journey. So something to consider. The next piece, when you start thinking about your your allocation of your resources, is to consider the words you use and the stories that you tell. Right? If you are interacting and you're using the word stress, and I have a really good friend of mine who constantly uses the word stress as a blanket stress. She's like, "Oh, don't stress about this." I'm like, "What?" Because she just uses it, and we joke about it now. And I've explained my philosophies, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense." She's right. I She says I use the word stress to mean everything. Every other emotion there is, I just call it stress. And it's like, but then that basically does a disservice to your ability to feel less stress, right? So we want to be sure that we're choosing our words carefully, leaning into and recognizing what emotion am I actually feeling? What emotion is really, truly driving this situation? And so every time you hear the word stress, challenge yourself, your colleagues, your teammates, your family, your friends to choose another word. Just get in the habit of interrupting the "I'm so stressed" or "oh, that's stressful" or "don't stress" or, all of that languaging. It's just not helpful in the world, for sure. The, the words create as well the stories. And the stories are what will define our emotional and our emotional connection to a scenario. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot when I'm doing my training with groups or even with my coaching clients is about the ice cube that became the snowman. And the ice cube is a representation, it's a metaphor for all the tasks and obstacles that you need to deal with in your day. And then we end up packing snow around it. And ultimately, we have to melt these snowmen instead of just melting ice cubes, right? But this snow is represented by things like misplaced emotion, negative storyline, and barriers to performance, like worrying and judging and self-doubt and all of those different things that I talk about in my book. There, take back your weekend. And those those pieces can unnecessarily intensify everything that you're having to deal with. And that's just about recognizing the patterns, choosing to see them, seeing the triggers that are causing them, and then finding solutions that you can overcome that. We've got a comment from Greg here. Thanks for talking about the algorithms. You're welcome. I think it can be so dangerous if you don't realize that your social media experience is customized and tailored to you, different from the person beside you on the same platform. It's a myopic view at best. And I'm going to read it from here, the rest. From the person beside you on the same platform, it's a myopic view at best. And that's why it evokes emotions and keeps you captivated. This is so critical. And I'm actually thinking of something else now that you've brought that up, Greg, is we have no idea what other people are thinking, right? Obviously, deep thoughts by Ali G here. But one of the things, so if social media is feeding an extreme story to someone on any side of a big debate, okay? If it's feeding that, because people have said to me, I don't understand how certain people are so charged, how families have been ripped apart by some of the circumstances that we have in the news. And I look at it from, my perspective and the work I do, and I think it makes a lot of sense, because if they've gone down a path where they believe X and the algorithm is fixated on the fact that they believe X, and then it feeds them more and more and more content to reinforce X and get them more emotionally charged by it, then when you come along and your feed has been feeding you Y, and you get more and more Y and this and this and this, Z, right, or Z, and you're going down this path, and you're both, it's like a divergent path, right? And you're both thinking you're absolutely right, but you've both been fed an entirely different path of knowledge based on the algorithm. And so when we're thinking about destructive stress, if we don't recognize that, like I'll watch something and then I'll notice my YouTube subscription, like my recommendations will start to change. And I've actually started saying, do not recommend this, take this channel off, because it just is, it's testing a direction. And that's not the direction I want to go. Right. And so, but that's a conscious decision to be sure that I'm trying to, because I'm just at risk as everybody. Like, I mean, I live this stuff every day working it with clients, and I'm the first to admit that I'm fallible, right? Like, and so I'm looking at that YouTube stream and I'm like, no, don't recommend this type. Not interested, like actually starting to push some of those buttons so that it's not so free willy and up to the algorithm what direction I'm going to go to. Because if I'm going to go on either path, I would prefer to choose the path that's going to take me in a more positive direction. Not because I want to be naive to the world around me. I definitely am not. It's just that if we have to let information into our minds, let's choose it to be information that will serve our greater good and make us feel, better rather than worse. Now, I know Greg's been actively commenting. If anybody else has any ideas that you want to share on how you stop the destructive stress cycle in your life, how you have managed to pull out of that looping, that spiral of stress, then please, I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. Bring that up and share it with others. So that perspective piece, I think for me, it's also the intent, right? And I find a lot of destructive stress gets created because we have an assumption, and I did a video a little while ago around assumptions and how it's killing your opportunities. But I think the assumption that so-and-so is doing this because of this, or making the assumption that they're just going to do it this way because that's how that kind of person always does it, or that's how they've done it in the past. If we make that assumption, then we're just rehearsing for the tragedy, which is ultimately causing us even more destructive stress in our lives. So really, that's my thinking for today, is getting committed to and not allowing the buy-in that destructive stress needs to be an automatic. We can go through our lives and not get sucked into the drama and the anxiety and the overwhelm and take out of our flow. Sure, we might get in there a little bit, but how quickly we come out of it, that's completely up to us. So I hope that has given you something to think about today and will inspire you to just, be less stressed if you're feeling stressed, and I encourage others to as well, because collectively, I think we can create a much stronger, more harmonious environment and society for people to be working in. Lori. All right, what's Lori saying? Returning to work after the long weekend can feel stressful. Yes. Better described as intense, frantic, overwhelming. It's manageable if I step back and realize what's happening and adjust approach and expectations. So true. And, it's interesting about the long weekend, because for many people, weekends are a time of a lot of guilt because there's workload at work, and I should be doing some work and I should be getting caught up, and there's always too much to get done. And then this creates more of a destructive stress cycle, because ultimately you aren't truly recharging and relaxing and feeling refreshed and like you can take on the world, right? Because you just spent the whole weekend feeling anchored to the problems that you're facing during the week. And so that's a really, really great point to pull up. And I do like your correction of stressful is better described as intense, frantic, and overwhelming. See, all words that we can then deal with, because they have, if we just use the word stressed, it's very different than intense. Okay, so there's a lot of workload. I got to deal with that. This is like, it's high volume. So let's be really clear about priorities and hone in and focus and do some focus work blocks, etc. So it makes it very, it makes it easier, and say very easy, to overcome and to find our flow and leverage the good stress. So on that note, if anybody has any other chit chats, I would love to bring them up. But I am going to otherwise say, put that on as a call that a day, if we shall say. I've got a few things to do for clients, and then I'm going to go for a walk and de-stress, because it's the other thing, like our activity, taking breaks, all of it can add to and lower our destructive stress. So on that note, may you stress less, do more, and be happier. Be sure to sign up. I've got 21 solutions that I find are the best for maximizing your productivity and lowering destructive stress. You can sign up at allisongraham.co/21-tips. And also, do not forget about my online course called Take Back Your Weekends, Stress Less, Do More, and Be Happier. And what I will do is I will put that in the chat box. There we go. There's the link for it. All right. Have a beautiful day, and I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.